more hard-hitting news. If you want the truth, go to ICanDecide.org and donate now. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are out there in the world. It's time to step out onto the high wire. I cannot express how excited I am about today's show. Now, I'm always excited to be doing the high wire. I love doing the high wire, but this week, and every once in a while, something absolutely blows my mind. And today we have several things that blew my mind. And so I'm going to do my best to translate to you, so you better get ready. If you need to drink your green tea or go grab a cup of coffee, wake up your brains, because today we are going to blow some minds. Trust me on that. But before we get to that, what about blowing our minds about the truth? Is medicine blowing our minds? Are they just rocking it out of the park? Are we ready to see this vaccine just, let it rip? Or what about the mask wearing? How has that all worked? Well, a gigantic study by the CDC, the most important study that has been done, that looked at masks and looked at opening restaurants and the dangers of that, the CDC is now touting the biggest study they have ever done. And this is what that sounded like in the news.
Scientists at the CDC say they now have evidence that masks work.
Masks work.
Masks work. Mask mandates work. And lifting mask mandates is very dangerous.
Mask mandates reduce COVID-19 case counts and deaths, according to more data published today by the CDC.
A sobering new study from the CDC, which looked at counties that allowed indoor dining and those with mask mandates. It found that those with restrictions had far lower rates of illness and death.
With the optimism of reopening comes the warning of a flood of new infections.
We have seen this movie before. When prevention measures like mask mandates are rolled back, cases go up.
It's critical that they follow the science.
Well, the news went crazy about this study. Of course, this has been a debate. This is what I've been blamed for spreading misinformation here by sharing studies from around the world that show that masks are essentially useless. I've also pointed out the fact that originally Tony Fauci was against masks, and then he decided, no, you have to wear a mask, and just recently switched to 2 masks, which I think proves that 1 mask must not have been working very well. But the media went crazy because they finally had their study, okay? Now, today we're going to be talking about a lot of things, but I want to talk about truth. I want to talk about the discussion of truth. I want to talk about inflating the truth or maybe misrepresenting the truth. How badly has this story been misrepresented? I'm going to start out with a question for you. Given the headlines that you saw, and let's read a couple of these. Here we go. CNBC. CDC study finds easing mask and restaurant rules led to more COVID cases and deaths as some states moved to lift restrictions. CNN Health says mask mandates and restaurant restrictions tied to fewer COVID-19 illnesses and deaths. CDC study says we've now got our proof. And here's another one. Study finds mask mandates and dining out influence virus spread. They've got their proof, right? It's everywhere. It's headlines across our nation. Now, I'm going to ask you, when you hear those headlines and you hear affirmatively they're saying, you better not open up or there will be a wave of cases, right? In your mind, let's think about this study. Let's bring up this question. I want you to guess the rate of COVID decrease they discovered with mask wearing. Now, this study basically looked at before we had mask mandates and after in all of the counties. I mean, they spent millions of dollars on this study, so this is going to be as accurate as you can get. Did masks reduce the growth rate of the spread of COVID by 90%? By B, 50%? By C, 20%? And as you look at that, I want to ask yourself, what percentage would you want to see the decrease of the growth or the spread of COVID-19 in the cases? What percentage would warrant all that's happened with masks? Okay, now that you've asked that question, why don't we go to the science for an answer? So for the answer, let's go to the study itself. Now, this is obviously, let's bring it back here. I want to be honest with people. Remember, I worked for CBS, okay? I won an Emmy Award producing the CBS talk show, The Doctors. So I understand the news. I understand how this works. And what I'm going to show you is that journalists are failing you. Here's what they looked at probably. Let's look at the headline first. Association of state-issued mask mandates and allowing on-premises restaurant dining with county-level COVID-19 case and death growth rates. United States, March 1st to December 31st, 2020. Sounds huge, right? It's gigantic. I mean, county by county. And believe me, this was a huge study. Now, just like when you're doing a book report in elementary school and you didn't actually read the book, you got to ask yourself, could I write a whole book report just on that headline? It would be tough. But you see, the CDC does you a little favor. They give you the cliff note right at the top. So let's check out the cliff note that the CDC provided to all the journalists that don't want to read the whole study. Here we go. Here's the summary. Mask mandates were associated with decreases in daily COVID-19 case and death growth rates from 1 to 20 days, 21 to 40 days, 41 to 60 days, 61 to 80 days, and 81 to 100 days. Yes, we looked at all of those categories and days after implementation, allowing any on-premises dining at restaurants was associated with increases in daily COVID-19 case growth rates on 41 to 60 days, 61 to 80 days, and 81 to 100 days after reopening. And increases in daily mandates was associated, now we're talking about masks, with reduced SARS-CoV-2 transmission, whereas reopening restaurants for on-premises dining was associated with increased transmission. There you go. Now you got your cliff note, now you can really fake a book report, or maybe even a CNN headline news story. What you're going to say is, CDC study shows that wearing masks had significant decreases in the spread of coronavirus, and opening restaurants was seen with an incredible increase, a wave of cases, right? That's how it's reported. And that's what you had right there. They said it right in the summary. Moving on. Only one thing that we do a little bit different here at the Highwire than apparently everybody else in the world of media. We actually read the whole study, okay? Including the charts even, okay? So why don't we go to the chart on this, shall we? Here's the chart that we're actually talking about. Association between state-issued mask mandates and changes in COVID-19 case and death growth rates. United States, March 1st to 20. This is what they did. Remember all those categories. So what they did was they looked at the days before they had the mandate. So 41 to 60 days before, you were at about a 0. At 21 to 40 days before, it looked like masks, that not wearing masks, we were seeing a growth rate of, was going up faster than before. But the Reverend, 1 to 20 days before, this is the reference point that they do the rest of the study. The rest of the days will be referencing where were we at days 1 through 20. So here we go. So you ready for it? Was it 90%? Was it 50%? Was it 20%? Well, in the category of 1 to 20, the first days of the mask mandate, let's bring up this graph. There it is. 1 to 20 days after, we had an incredible 0.5% reduction in the growth rates of cases and a 0.7% reduction in deaths. Now, first of all, you got to ask yourself, how did you see a drop in deaths 20 days in? The virus would have to run its course first, so that even seems like a fake number. But either way, did you recognize that 0.5 percentage point was the gain made by masking? That was what was this incredible decrease? Let's look at the rest of the days, because it gets better. It gets better. By 21 to 40 days, we rose to an incredible just over 1% gain on the spread of the illness. And by 41 to 60 days, an astonishing 1.5% reduction in the growth rate of COVID-19 across the country that really took fire by days 61 to 80 when we made it to a full whopping 1.7% drop in the growth rate of cases. And then, of course, the coup de grace, 81 to 100 days, we made it to an incredible 1.8% drop in the growth rate of the illness and the cases across America. All right, folks, I know, when we look at this, I know people are saying we get confused. So I want to try and make this as clear as possible. Can we get a pie chart, please? Now imagine there's a pie chart, and we're thinking about, remember, in a pie for 100%, if we're going to have 90% success rate, meaning we reduce the spread of coronavirus by 90% by wearing masks, you would see 90 pieces, right? So here's our pie, and there's where we're at. That was it. That was the greatest amount of decrease we saw in all of the masking of the entire United States of America. Every county where we did it, that many people, 98 people out of 100, were having no effect whatsoever. We were only seeing a mitigation of growth of 1.8%, not even 2%. We destroyed the lives of our children in school. We destroyed restaurants and everything else, and we made everybody wear masks. We robbed you of free chances to breathe the air because we were getting a whopping 1.8% return on our investment of perpetual mask wearing. Okay. Now, maybe that seems big to you. Hopefully, you have enough brain cells and you are saying, what? What? Now let's look at restaurants. Restaurants opening. How many restaurants in your neighborhood say out of business? I just heard on the news today, they were saying in New York City, it feels like every other door is a closed business. How many businesses were shut down because they had to lock down? We couldn't have the spread, especially in those, those petri dishes of disease known as bars and restaurants. What happened in the states where we actually saw them defy the restrictions and open up? What we saw, if we were going by CNN in the news, was a wave of cases that set us back. As Joe Biden put it, we can't allow that to happen. So let's ask the question again. When you hear about a wave, when you hear the President of the United States saying it would be absolutely catastrophic if restaurants were to open in Texas, what do they actually mean? Can we have the question? Guess the rate of COVID increase from restaurants opening. Do you think it was 90%? A, B, 50%, C, 20%, or D, 2%, something like what we achieved with mask wearing? Or none of the above? Actually, as it turns out, it's none of the above. Shall we look at the numbers? Should we actually read deeper into the charts and the study and what it actually said? Let's take a look at the charts. Once again, they're looking at those first 40 to 60 days, 21, 40 days to see where we were at. But then 1 to 20 days before is what we use as the baseline we were going to compare to. So comparing the 20 days after the first 20 days, 20 days after opening up restaurants, we saw, we didn't see an increase. We saw a decrease in the amount of cases in those counties across the country. What? So for the first 20 days, when restaurants opened up, it went down 0.4%. Now, I would never celebrate that because that is a ridiculously small number, but let's be clear. It went down, not up. We didn't see cases increase. And then 21 to 40 days later, when restaurants and bars were wide open in these places, they were still at a decreased growth rate of 0.1%. Still nothing to scream about, but it wasn't making the matter worse. But then, all of a sudden, that tidal wave comes. That gigantic tidal wave comes, and then we see 41 to 60 days after, a whopping 0.9% increase in the growth rate of cases across America, almost 1%. And then it really gets out of control 61 to 80 days, where having all of our restaurants and our ability to eat out and to keep our economy steaming ahead, got to shut that down. When we decided to open up, by 61 to 80 days, a whopping 1.2% growth rate was discovered. And then, once again, actually it didn't go up. By 81 to 100 days, it starts dropping down to a mere 1.1% growth rate of cases in America. Folks, everyone that owns a restaurant out there, the restaurants in California and those places that we've had the owners onto our show that are in courtrooms fighting because they resisted the mandate and said, no, I'm not going to destroy my family business because you're telling me I have to. I have a right to breathe air. My customers have a right to breathe air. And they have a right to come into my restaurant and have food and libations. And as it turns out, by resisting those orders and opening up, we only had a 1.2% increase in cases. That's it. There it is. That was the entire gain made by wearing masks and by shutting down. I mean, by shutting down restaurants, or in this case, opening up restaurants, this was the increase. Let's look at the two together, shall we? This is what it's all been about. Lock everybody down, keep them out of restaurants. We saw an increase of 1.2% when we went against that. Put everybody in masks, that was the amount of decrease we saw in the entire puzzle, an entire piece. Do you realize how many years, maybe decades, you would have to continue these measures to ever actually have an effect that mattered to any human being on this planet? The media is not telling you that. So either they are totally misrepresenting it, or as I would guess, they are so freaking stupid they don't know how to read an entire study put out by the CDC. And the CDC knows that, don't they? Do you think they don't know that the reason that they're writing a summary that doesn't have any of the numbers, it doesn't tell you it's 0.1% or 0.9%? They leave all of that out so that you will run with your headline. And then if you actually read the study, you have to read about 2/3 of it before you get to the part where they actually start presenting numbers. You know what they're doing? It's as simple as putting lipstick on a pig. There it is. This is the great report of the week. Masks work and restaurants should be shut down. Baby, that is a pig if there ever was a pig. And no matter how much lipstick you put on it, the American people will not put up with results in the 1% to 2% range. And then when you think about it, think about if that's where masks are at and they're lying about masks and making it sound like that really had some great effect, what do we think about vaccines? It makes me reflect on what the former head of the CDC said about masks compared to vaccines. Take a look at this.
These face masks are the most important, powerful public health tool we have. I might even go so far as to say that this face mask is more guaranteed to protect me against COVID than when I take a COVID vaccine, because the immunogenicity may be 70%. And if I don't get an immune response, the vaccine's not going to protect me. This face mask will.
There you have it. I mean, if that face mask is even better than the vaccine at its whopping 2% of mitigation possibilities, maybe you really got to start asking yourself, what the hell is in this vaccine? Does it do anything at all? And remember, when we're talking 1% to 2% in giant population studies, obviously they can't account for age and all the comorbidities and what was actually going on, what was the weather. None of that is in there. So at 1.2%, you might as well just blow it off the table. It's a sand painting. There's nothing there. And that is the best study they ever did. That's just how we're getting started. Wait till you see what we've got in the rest of the show. But first, it's time for the Jackson Report. All right, Jeffrey, I'm in a great mood. Just because anytime you really catch people either bold-faced lying or admitting that they have no IQ whatsoever in the media, that's kind of a good day. What do you got for us?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the media is singing kind of a different tune, and this is what it looks like. We're talking about opening, or the great reopening, as in the case of certain articles. So the articles are starting to look like a lot of states are beginning to move towards opening up. So there's an article here from the American Institute for Economic Research, and it is called The Great Opening. Basically, in the first week of March, we're seeing governors in Mississippi, Texas, as we covered last week, Alabama, Arizona, West Virginia, even Connecticut, which is a blue state. Most of this has been kind of a conservative push, but they're all moving to lift these capacity restrictions. Some of them are moving to end the mask restrictions or the mask wearing. And as you just said in your opening there, another way to put this are 16 states are now following the science. This was another headline by Jordan Sachtel. He's a really great writer, been following him since the beginning. Really just a concise headline. But one of the narratives that's running through this whole thing that I really wanted to talk about. So you mentioned the former CDC director, Robert Redfield. Yeah. So he stepped down. In Biden's transition team, put a new director into the CDC, and Redfield joined Maryland's public health team as a senior advisor The headline, former CDC Director Dr. Robert Redfield joins Maryland's coronavirus task force. Well, 8 days later, he's up on TV with the governor of Maryland standing right next to him, and they're announcing that they're opening up the state, which in that region is a first. And that headline looks like this: Maryland's Hogan lifts caps on dining, retail, and religious establishments. That's effective tomorrow at 5 p.m. Capacity limits on indoor, outdoor dining, fitness centers, religious establishments. And again, this is a dramatic step for this region. Connecticut, so like we were saying, it's mostly conservative, looking across the board at these now 17
they call it like
states.
The conservative wave, right? Like, being against these mandates.
Absolutely. Yeah, Connecticut is moving. They're still, Connecticut still has a mask mandate, but they're moving to lift capacity restrictions as well, similar to Maryland. However, as these restrictions begin to fade away, there's some science, there's some data that is staring us, and has been and still is staring us directly in the face. And nothing really distills this like these two headlines here. And let's give the first word to Dr. Scott Atlas. This was in the Stanford Review. Dr. Scott Atlas writes the last word, and this is what he intends to put through with this article. He writes, "This crisis has also exposed what we have all known existed, but we have tolerated for years: the overt bias of the media, the lack of diverse viewpoints on campuses, the absence of neutrality in big tech controlling social media, now more visible than ever, the intrusion of politics into science. Ultimately, the freedom to seek and state the truth is at risk here in the United States."
And for those people that, for those people that don't remember, Scott Atlas actually joined the team near the end of the Trump administration, was in there as a, as a part of the coronavirus task force. And it's fascinating because, though he was, a lot of people want to say he was crazy, Robert Redfield, the CDC, I mean, when you're talking about him moving on to Maryland and immediately opens things up, he was the one in the administration. It was almost like there was a war going on between him and Fauci. We talked about it a lot that was going on because he was saying, look, it looks like these lockdowns are doing more damage. We have higher rates of suicide, higher rates of drug abuse, and all of these other issues than we do of coronavirus. That means the lockdown is actually worse than the virus. But obviously he wasn't getting heard. But as soon as he gets out of the administration and gets to someone that will listen, what do? They open up. But incredible. And Scott Atlas, he's been on this from the beginning.
Right. And the great point about Redfield, that was during the end of June. So right around when the peak was still at its height. And he was warning there's a suicide risk for high school kids. There's, like you said, the drug overdoses. So that's the other narrative that's running through here, is it seems like there's kind of a slow motion admission to the lockdowns were wrong. And this is what it's caused.
Right.
So back to Scott Atlas, he directly talks about these lockdowns now. He says, all legitimate policy scholars should today be openly re-examining policies that severely harmed America's families and children while failing to save the elderly. To determine the best path forward necessarily means admitting that social lockdowns and significant restrictions on individuals are deadly and extraordinarily harmful, especially on the working class, minorities, and the poor.
Man.
And now we have another voice that's been out front. This is Jay Bhattacharya. He's a Stanford doctor, and he's been in the media as well. It's kind of seizing this opportunity to really make the point again. Now, he was one of the authors of the Great Barrington Declaration. It says, Stanford doctor calls lockdowns the biggest public health mistake we've ever made. He writes, he was asked for a comment by Newsweek. He writes, I stand behind my comment that the lockdowns are the single worst public health mistake in the last 100 years. We will be counting the catastrophic health and psychological harms imposed on nearly every poor person on the face of the earth for a generation. At the same time, they have not served to control the epidemic in the places where they have been most vigorously imposed. Powerful words by Jay.
It's amazing, and obviously had an opportunity to maybe reconfigure his statement, but instead stands in it. This is the greatest, mistake in perhaps science history. Coming up a little bit later in this show, I think we will present what appears to be the mistake that will outlive the one Jay Bhattacharya is talking about, but we'll get to that in a minute. Amazing. I mean, and it's amazing seeing these scientists step forward, and it feels like there's more of them. I mean, right, the Great Barrington Declaration, Martin Kulldorff, Dr. Sunetra Gupta, and Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, who just was a part of that article, they wrote the Great Barrington Declaration. And that declaration now, here's where it's at. Look at this. We have 560,197 concerned citizens. I don't even think these are the most recent numbers. I believe we're up over 50,000. Yeah, this is not current, actually. We are now over 50,000 scientists and doctors that have signed on saying these lockdowns were the biggest mistake of all times. There it is,
Right.
over 50,000 experts that back up, all of that's being said. Back up where Redfield is now at. Back up where Jay Bhattacharya is at, where Scott Atlas and many others are at. Is the mainstream media ever going to admit this? We're ever going to hear on CNN, as it turns out, we're going to finally tell you the truth. We effed up. We effed up. We bet on the wrong team, and we put all of your money, we put all of your lives on the wrong team. Sorry about that. I mean, a sorry would at least be nice, but something tells me we will never get that.
Right, right. And what we do have is a promise of that vaccine, and the promise that that vaccine would allow us to open up, would allow us to get back to our lives. There's a lot of states doing it regardless of the coverage, even though the coverage is still increasing. They're saying, look, we got to open this up, and they're doing that, 17 states. But the CDC has released new guidance, this is interim guidance for vaccinated people. So basically to tell them what to do, the headlines, I mean, they're looking like this. Here's what the CDC says fully vaccinated people have the freedom to do. I put this in here because how as a society did we ever get in a position where headlines like this are happening, where the CDC is allowing to tell us about what freedoms we can have inside our own homes?
My doctor's going to
regardless,
dictate freedom, not the government or police officers, but doctors. Doctors will decide how free I get to be. Amazing.
Right.
What are the guidelines
from an agency? Okay, so these are the interim public health recommendations. So again, these are recommendations for fully vaccinated people. And I thought this was interesting before we go into those. This is right at the beginning. It says the benefits of reducing social isolation and relaxing some measures such as quarantine requirements may outweigh the residual risk of fully vaccinated people becoming ill with COVID-19 or transmitting SARS-CoV-2 to others. Additionally, taking steps towards relaxing certain measures for vaccinated persons may help improve COVID-19 vaccine acceptance and uptake. How I read that through the lines is we screwed up. We got to stop this social isolation. And the second part of that is basically just a PR move. We're going to let vaccinated people do this just to increase uptake because we don't want hesitancy.
This isn't science, this is PR. We're making a PR move. But what I find more interesting about that is the fact that they are directly admitting that we know after the vaccine you are going to get sick and you are going to get ill, which means we're telling you right now the vaccine doesn't freaking work. But under those circumstances, we're going to give you some guidelines so you can get out and about so more of you get this totally unsuccessful product.
Right. And here's some of the guidelines. So let's start with what fully vaccinated people should continue to do. They need to take precautions in public, like wearing a well-fitted mask, perhaps two, and physical distancing, avoid medium and large size in-person gatherings, wear masks, maintain physical distance, and practice other prevention measures when visiting with unvaccinated people from multiple households. I mean, what they can do is visit with other fully vaccinated people indoors without wearing masks and a couple other things. But I mean, that's already happening.
So they could go to the vaccine club. For everybody that hopped on the Rocket to Mars club, all of us risking our lives with this product that obviously is going to make us sick and probably will spread to others. But with each other, since we've all got it, what difference does it make what we spread to each other? We're in this together.
That's right. And there's an interesting point here. There's been no change in their travel recommendations for vaccinated people. So CDC still recommends that they delay travel. Vaccinated people, they stay at home to protect themselves. And it's kind of a contradictory situation, but they have not changed that. And why do vaccinated people still need to wear masks, still not able to travel or should delay travel? Well, it's in this next slide here, and this is the science brief, the background rationale and evidence for public health recommendations that they've used. And it says here why vaccinated people, like you said, could potentially still get COVID-19 and spread it to others. When are people going to really understand that this shot has not been proven to stop infection? It continually says it. It says it in the CDC documents. We hear it over and over, and it says it in the clinical trials. This is a known fact. You have to get this crossed.
And you asked the right question, right? Like, when are people going to get it? They're going to get it when, somebody at CNN or MSNBC or Fox decides to tell them the freaking truth. And maybe it's because that if they're all reading summaries in the first sentence in the study instead of actually, reading what's actually being said there, then maybe they would get to the truth, and maybe they would start sharing the truth instead of the misinformation that all of mainstream media, and by the way, Dr. Anthony Fauci keeps spewing. And I'm so tired, I know you're tired, of all these news agencies. They might even ask the right question, like, Dr. Fauci, why is it I have to wear a mask after getting the vaccine if the vaccine, stops my infection? Well, the vaccine stops clinical disease at 90 to 94%, as has been proved. But, there's still a lot of virus out there, and we're going to have to, try and mitigate that. Until everybody's vaccinated, we won't be able to stop it. Oh, great, moving on. That's how every news program has been, and every news anchor that's not doing their job. But you and I both know something outrageous happened yesterday. Tony Fauci had his hands full with somebody that just actually brought follow-up questions for the first time in history, and probably in Fauci's history, as far as I can tell. Usually it's like, whatever the king said, let's all move on. Well, right. It wasn't CNN. It wasn't MSNBC. It wasn't Fox. It wasn't CNBC. It was actually an actor, a Mexican actor, director, comedian, Eugenio Derbez, was apparently doing one of these Q&As. I've seen other actors do these with Tony Fauci, I suppose, so that Fauci could go out promote to, in this case, the Latin community. Let's get Eugenio Derbez to, put us on his Instagram. Well, he did. And I think what happened was amazing. We were watching this with bated breath. Let's show the people we saw here, Jeffrey. Take a look at this. This is Mexican actor, director, and comedian in an interview on his Instagram yesterday. Watch this.
Thank you, Dr. Fauci. Well, let's get straight to the point.
Okay.
I was telling people that I was a little bit concerned, and so I had a lot of doubts about the vaccine, and then I got this invitation to talk to you, so it would be really helpful for all of us to learn and to understand about the vaccine. So, first question, which of the COVID-19 vaccines have been officially approved by the FDA?
3 of them. One from Moderna, which is the mRNA vaccine, one from Pfizer, which is another mRNA vaccine, and the other one is from J&J, Johnson & Johnson, which is a little bit different. It gives the same kind of response, but it's a little bit different. So there are 3 vaccines that have gotten emergency use authorization from the FDA so far.
I was sitting thinking, oh man, he did it again. I mean, I don't know if you caught that, everybody. You see what he did? So this actor asked the question, which of the vaccines have been approved by the FDA? And this is something that no one in media seems to understand. There's a difference between an approval and an emergency use authorization. Approval means you have to go through all of your safety studies, right? You have to, made sure and proven it's safe in long-term, short-term, all of that, how the placebo group do. But we've jumped in this emergency use authorization, which is really essentially a right to try. And Jeffrey, were you just sitting there thinking, oh my God, he's done it again. He's just done his word salad and totally confused this actor?
Yeah, every news anchor would have stopped there. Would have not asked any questions.
That's it.
Yep.
Got it. Got my answer. It is approved. But not apparently Eugenio Derbez. He continued. Watch this. I think this is the first time this has ever happened. I wish it happened on CNN, but on Instagram, good enough. Take a look at this.
So I'm going to play here the devil's advocate.
Okay.
To understand better, I asked if it was approved by the FDA, but I think that it's a different thing that an emergency use authorization than an approval. So what is the difference between an emergency use authorization and an official approval by the FDA?
Yes, that's a very good question. So an emergency use authorization is based on the criteria if the benefit clearly outweighs the risk and that you get a good degree of efficacy and safety. The full licensure is when you follow it for a longer period of time and you get more information and data. I have no doubt, given how very, very efficacious all 3 of these are, that they will ultimately get the full authorization in the sense of what's called a biological license approval. But an emergency use authorization is really quite of an important step in the direction of getting it the official approval.
Okay, so but if the vaccines are safe and effective, why hasn't the FDA given any of them the full official approval and license?
Actually, Eugenio, that is a very good question. There isn't like they have any problem with it. It just takes logistically a long time to get the approval. So when this is such a good product that you want to get it to people as quickly as possible because it's life-saving, you give it what's called an emergency use authorization. Not that there's anything less effective in it. You just takes a long time to get the full approval. And rather than deprive people of getting a life-saving vaccine before all of the I's get dotted and the T's get crossed, they give it an emergency use authorization based on a lot of solid data that it works.
I mean, I wonder at what point. I mean, I was sort of thinking, wow, I mean, he just doesn't let it go, right? And then you've got Fauci trying to now spin this, right? Well, you're really great question, Eugenio, but the truth is that it takes a really long time to dot all the I's and cross the T's and do something called science, which we want to skip. We want to stick into assumptions and dreaming and make sure everybody gets it under the Assumptions and Dreaming Act, known as a emergency use authorization. And so it's just really a formality. What do you think? I'm wondering if, given the questions that Eugenio's asking, do you think that answer worked for him?
I don't think so. It's interesting. Dr. Fauci said there was no problem with it. Actually, there was a problem with it. I believe every one of the vaccines, AstraZeneca, Moderna, Pfizer's, they had to pause their trials because of safety issues, because of the safety signals. So I guess that stretched out the timeline a little bit to dot those I's and cross those T's.
That's right. There's a lot of I's and T's and Bell's palsy and anaphylaxis. All right, moving on. He didn't just stop there. I thought, then he goes into another set of questions, because then the question would be, right, if it's coming out really fast, what about like long-term studies? Actually, Eugenio got into that too.
What about the long-term? I mean, what is the medical and legal responsibility of the companies that are making the vaccines? What happens if secondary effects are seen, let's say, in 5 or 10 years? Can I sue the manufacturer of the product if it hurts me, or if there's long-term effects years down the road?
There is a fund that allows the compensation for injury, but I have to tell you, Eugenio, that it's very, very, very unlikely that you're going to have an effect 5 or 10 years down the pike. The reason we say that is that we have decades of experience in the field of vaccinology, and virtually all of the effects, if they even occur, and they're very rare, occur within 15 to 45 days following the dose.
I'm more concerned about the long-term effects, honestly. So, that's what I ask about if I can sue a manufacturer, but because governments around the world are taking the liability, governments, but I'm talking about the manufacturer. If there's a problem, can I sue the people that made the vaccine, not the government, the people that made the vaccine? Because I've heard they are protected from liability. If they're not willing to stand for their product, or if I can't sue them, does that mean they're worried it's going to hurt people?
They are very sensitive about hurting people, but you can sue anybody you want to sue. There's no guarantee, because it will be in a court that would decide whether or not you get compensation. But we have not had any issues with that in any of the other vaccines. So I would be really surprised if that's the case.
But let me tell you why. But there's one thing that I suppose would make people, or skepticals like me, more confident about vaccine. I'm thinking about if they remove the protections on vaccine manufacturers. I think that the ability to be sued, and when I'm talking about suing is not about money at all. The ability to be sued is what makes companies make a better product. If you take that away, what incentive do they have to fix a problem with their product? You know what I mean? If the manufacturers could be sued for every death and injury that is caused by the vaccination, probably they wouldn't put it in the market right now, or I think they should be responsible for the product they've made.
You know, they really actually are. I think one of the things you got to separate is when you get injury in a trial or injury in a product after it has been fully approved. You have the opportunity. I mean, I understand where you're coming from and why you bring it up, but you have the opportunity to sue anybody, anytime, for anything you want to do. That is the truth.
My eyes are probably red because I am here laughing myself stupid. I mean, first, I can't tell which is better, is watching what is clearly was supposed to be just some Mexican actor that's going to promote this to the Latin community, now asking real questions about liability. And then I don't know if you're tuning in because it's so, but Fauci, do you see the look on his face? It's like he must be saying to him, like, you know, get me out of here. We were like literally watching Fauci have one of the worst days of his life in the hands of a Mexican comedian. I mean, it's just fantastic.
Right. He's getting bumped around really bad there. And there's a couple points that should be made just to back up Eugenio. I'll use Fauci's vernacular. There's a very, very, very small chance that you're going to be able to sue the vaccine manufacturers. Some may call it complete immunity. This is the PrEP Act. The PrEP Act is going to be what the COVID vaccine, the court, it's called the Countermeasures Court, it's going to be directed to. And this says that the PrEP Act says a PrEP Act declaration is specifically for the purpose of providing immunity from liability and is different from and not dependent on other emergency declarations. And then, of course, what Fauci started to say was there is an act, and that is the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act, 1986. Right. And what that says is no person may bring a civil action for damages in an amount greater than $1,000 or in an unspecified amount against a vaccine administrator or manufacturer in a state or federal court for damages arising from a vaccine-related injury or death associated with the administration of a vaccine after October 1st, 1988.
You know, and at the end of that, Fauci actually does what he normally does. He'll word salad like crazy, but when he's pressed against the wall, he ends up lying. He says, you can sue anybody, anytime, for anything you want. And that's a fact. That's the truth. That's how he ended that. We're going to look into if somehow he's perjured himself. We got our legal team jumping all over that. But it didn't stop there. Let's take a look at another video by this incredible, in the middle of this incredible discussion.
I've heard that the reason people should take vaccines is to create herd immunity. What is herd immunity?
Well, the first reason to take the vaccine is to protect yourself, your family, and your community. Herd immunity refers to a situation where you have a high percentage of people who are vaccinated so that when the virus enters the community, there are so few people to attack that the virus has a difficulty in propagating itself. And by herd immunity means you get an umbrella of protection because so many people are protected that when the virus comes in, it spreads only when there are a lot of vulnerable people. But if a certain percentage of the people are protected, like with measles, if you get 90% of the people vaccinated with measles, 91, 92%, when you get measles introduced into the community, it will not spread.
Okay. Now, I have friends that consider themselves very healthy. They say they don't need the vaccine. But I've heard that even if healthy people have a very low risk of dying from COVID, they should still get the vaccine so they don't spread the virus to people who might be too old or too sick to get the vaccine. Is that true?
That's absolutely true. So an example, if you're a young, healthy person, statistically, the chances are that if you get infected, you're not going to get seriously ill. The people who get seriously ill and die, and I must point out, as I think you know, already there have been 525,000 deaths in this country, which is absolutely terrible. The worst of any pandemic in over 100 years. But when you get vaccinated, not only do you protect yourself, but you prevent yourself from inadvertently and maybe innocently and unknowingly infecting someone who is a loved one, a family member, or just maybe somebody in society who, if they did get infected, they would have a serious consequence.
And now I have a question about that. The news has reported that the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines are 95% effective. Does this mean that if I get the vaccine, I won't get infected with the SARS-CoV-2 virus?
That means that there's a 95% chance that you will not get symptomatic infection, namely that you won't get infected to the point that you get symptoms. But we are unsure right now what the protection is against infection, because it's conceivable that you could get vaccinated, get exposed, get infected, not know it because the vaccine is protecting you against symptoms, but that you could have virus in your nasopharynx, which is the reason why we say until we prove that the vaccine prevents transmission, that people who are vaccinated should wear a mask when they're near people who might be vulnerable to infection.
Yeah, but I think it's a different thing. To stop the clinical disease or the symptoms is different from getting the virus, the infection, right? So basically, the vaccine lowers my symptoms, but it may not prevent me from being infected with SARS-CoV-2, which means there's a possibility that I can still spread the virus even after I receive the vaccine. Correct?
That's the reason why that's the reason why we ask you to wear a mask after you've been vaccinated.
Okay, but I'm confused with something. I thought herd immunity works because by being vaccinated, I block the virus from spreading to other people. But this vaccine may not do that. So how does herd immunity work if I can still spread the virus even after getting the vaccine?
Now, but the fact is the vaccine protects many people from getting infected. Some people might get infected and they might not even transmit it. We know that some people get infected. We know that. But not everybody who gets the vaccine is going to get infected without symptoms. So the overwhelming majority of the people who get vaccinated not only will not get sick, they won't get infected, but there will be some who might be infected. And when they are infected, it is unlikely that they will transmit it.
So there's a possibility that the vaccine can turn people into what is called asymptomatic carriers, which means they don't have symptoms, but they're still contagious, correct?
Yes, we've said that. That's true.
Boy, Fauci looks like he's getting pissed off that, yes, we've said that. That's true. I mean, I don't know how the audience is seeing this, but I'm telling you, this is just pure joy for me because I've been wanting to have a conversation like this. I've been waiting for Chris, quote, somebody at a network actually drill down. And once you do, you can tell he just absolutely averts. At one point, he's saying, no, that's why we're telling you to wear a mask because you can still be spreading it. And then by the end, he's like, well, no, it's very few people that, can be infected. And then gets nailed with, well, that's an asymptomatic carrier. And I love the line when he says, how do you get to herd immunity if you can still spread the virus? I mean, it's such a simple question, isn't it? It's the one I've been wanting to ask.
It's not that hard. He didn't drill down too hard. It was some basic questions. So any news agency that wants to increase their ratings, I mean, this interview from Eugenio has like over 1 million views.
Wow. Start
asking these questions. Just ask a couple follow-up questions. Okay, so it doesn't stop transmission. What do the headlines look like?
Yeah.
Check this one out. This is out of CBC. This new outbreak of COVID-19 in BC care home where 82% of residents were already vaccinated, not stopping transmission.
We're seeing that all over the place, aren't we? We're seeing these outbreaks long after even the second shot.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Unbelievable.
Absolutely.
All right, let's check out this last video. And by the way, I think that Eugenio should probably open a school of journalism for everybody in mainstream media right now so they can learn how to do their jobs. Take a look at this.
I know we're running out of time, but I have some questions from the audience. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine is not an mRNA vaccine, correct?
Correct.
What kind of vaccine is it?
It's a vaccine that uses a harmless common cold virus in which you insert the gene of the protein that you want the body to make an immune response against. You inject it, the body sees the protein, makes an immune response, and then protects you against infection.
There are many Latinos in the community that are practicing Catholics. Last week, Catholic bishops warned the Catholic community that they should not use the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. Can you explain why?
Well, some, not all, because there are Catholic bishops who are saying the opposite of that. And the reason is, in the preparation of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, they used a cell line that was taken from fetal tissue from years and years ago to be able to produce the vaccine. So some of the bishops felt that because that was used, that we should not use the vaccine. But many Catholic...
Sorry, is that true that there is a residual DNA from an aborted baby in the Johnson & Johnson vaccine?
No, there's no residual DNA that gets injected into you at all. It's in the preparation of the vaccine. There is no residual human fetal DNA at all.
No residual human DNA at all. Jeffrey, is that a true statement?
That seems like a slow pitch softball here to knock out of the park. I do believe that is not true. Let's look at the fact sheet. We covered this last week. This is the fact sheet J&J for healthcare providers administering the vaccine. And it says each dose may also contain residual amounts of host cell proteins less than or equal to 0.15 micrograms and or host cell DNA less than or equal to 3 nanograms.
And for 50 points, what was the host cell that was being used to work on this product?
I believe it was a retina cell from an abortion many, many, many years ago.
Yes. But not as many years ago as the MMR vaccine. My understanding is this aborted baby happened in 1985, not the ones we keep hearing about in the 1960s. I was corrected. There's one more video, and I think it's important, even though, you know, we got to move on with the rest of the show. We've got a huge story coming up. I actually think this is going to lead in that story very well. Eugenio really drills down on something that is critical, and that's the variants that we're seeing, the mutations of the virus. Look at how he nails Fauci against the wall here.
With over so many variants and counting, how effective are each of the approved vaccines?
The most prevalent variant in the United States is the one from the UK called the 117. And the vaccines that are available right now are highly effective against that particular variant. It's less effective against the South African variant, but that is not a prevalent variant in this country right now. The most prevalent one is the one from the UK.
And what if I get the vaccine, but it doesn't protect me against the new variant? Because I've heard that pharmaceuticals are working on a third booster shot. Is that true?
Yes, but let me explain what happened in a trial in South Africa with the J&J vaccine. It didn't completely protect against getting infected or getting symptoms, but it totally protected you against getting into the hospital and dying. So when you get exposed to a variant, you may not be completely protected, but it has a very, very good at protecting you from getting seriously ill.
And this third booster shot that they're working on, that says to me that probably they're not confident that the 2 shots are going to be good enough. Does it mean that the vaccine doesn't work against variants?
No, they're not saying that. They want to be doubly sure in case they have to give a booster. They want to determine what the effect of that booster is. So in order to be doubly sure, we're proceeding with studies to see what happens when you give a third shot. That has nothing to do with being confident or not confident. It means you want to be doubly sure that you're covering all the bases.
Wouldn't a third shot be actually triply sure? I think they're trying to be triply sure because the doubly sure is already failing them. I mean, an amazing question, and I think a great point, one that we've raised. You know, at the end, Eugenio doesn't actually tell us whether or not that convinced him. Something tells me in that line of questioning that he's not convinced. But everybody, those were just excerpts. It's really fun to watch it. Definitely check that out. It happened on Instagram. You can go to eDerbez. I'm at eDerbez on Instagram. Wherever you are out there, Eugenio, I want to thank you for some of the best laughs I've had in a very long time. And honestly, for pinning Dr. Word Soup, Food Word Salad Master, you know, manipulator of language, it was an incredible thing to witness.
That goes doubly sure for me too, Del.
All right, Jeffrey. We'll make sure you're doubly right when you bring our, you know, all the information you're going to bring to next week's show. Thank you for all your great work.
Thanks. I'll triply check it. Thank you.
Take care. All right, if you want to get more of Jeffrey Jackson, definitely check out the Jackson Report, which is found at thehighwire.com. He gets into a lot of these issues even deeper. And speaking to Eugenio's concerns over long-term damages or injuries, or as Fauci said, well, we really only see that they happen in the first 15 to 45 days. I want to bring up the VAERS reports. This is what's being reported. Remember, we are understanding that this is about 1%. If Harvard was right in their study of VAERS, 1% of what's really happening. But we now have 1,265 recorded deaths to VAERS. We have 2,743 hospitalizations, 4,930 in urgent care, 3,889 office visits, 240 cases of anaphylaxis that have been reported, and 278 cases of Bell's palsy that have been reported just in the couple months this has been out. If you're one of those people and you're trying to figure out what to do, or you've just been injured and want to know how you report to VAERS so maybe we can get the numbers above 1%, we can help you. This is the commercial about that.
If you or a loved one has been injured after receiving a COVID-19 vaccine, including if you are a participant in a clinical trial, go to injuredbycovidvaccine.com. Submissions are confidential. We are here to help provide support, including connecting with medical specialists and potentially securing legal representation. To assure the safety of COVID-19 vaccines for everyone, it is imperative that every person injured by this product report their injury. We can provide assistance completing a report to the CDC's Vaccine Adverse Events Reporting System. So, if you or a loved one has suffered an injury from a COVID-19 vaccine, go to injuredbycovidvaccine.com now.
Okay, now for really, I think, one of the most important stories I have perhaps covered in my entire career in medical journalism, which now spans, you know, around 15 years of working in television and media to discuss medical issues. Something gigantic has happened this week. At least I think it is, and you can decide for yourself as we weigh into this. To begin with, there is a world-renowned vaccine creator that went on his LinkedIn and put out a letter to every single professional in the world, essentially telling them we must stop the vaccination program immediately. Here's just a couple of excerpts from his letter. Let's take a look at this. As a dedicated virologist and vaccine expert, I only make an exception when health authorities allow vaccines to be administered in ways that threaten public health, most certainly when scientific evidence is being ignored. The present extremely critical situation forces me to spread this emergency call. As the unprecedented extent of human intervention in the COVID-19 pandemic is now at risk of resulting in a global catastrophe without equal, this call cannot sound loudly enough. He goes on, sufficient scientific evidence has been brought to the table. Unfortunately, it remains untouched by those who have the power to act. How long can one ignore the problem when there is at present massive evidence that viral immune escape is now threatening humanity? We can hardly say we didn't know or were not warned. In this agonizing letter, I put all of my reputation and credibility at stake. I expect from you, guardians of mankind, at least the same. It is of utmost urgency. Do open the debate. By all means, turn the tide. I think he goes on and has this statement to make, a form of a disclaimer, I suppose. For those who may have some difficulty in understanding how mass vaccination drives viral immune escape, it will suffice to watch infectivity and morbidity rates in those countries who have now succeeded in vaccinating millions of people in just a few weeks, e.g. UK, Israel, USA. Whereas these countries are now enjoying declining infectivity rates, they will undoubtedly start to suffer from a steep incline in COVID-19 cases in the weeks to come. The steep decline we're seeing right now may be followed by a short-lived plateau, but a subsequent steep incline of severe disease cases is inevitable. These are shocking statements. And to be clear, just so you recognize, this man could not be more pro-vaccine. In fact, he may be one of the most highly ranked and talented vaccine creators in the world. Let's take a look at the resume of the man that is screaming at the top of the mountain right now. This is Geert Vanden, PhD. He was at GSK Biologicals. He was a senior project leader of adolescent vaccine projects, new biotech vaccine development and QC/QA manager, head of adjuvant technologies and alternative deliveries and R&D. At Novartis Vaccines and Diagnostics, he was the director, research program leader, and head of adjuvants. At Solvay Biologicals, global project director of the influenza vaccines. For the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, he was the senior program officer, global health vaccine discovery. For Global Alliance for Vaccine and Immunization, which we refer to as Gavi, he was the program manager. And at UNIVAC, he was the chief innovation and scientific officer. He's also at the German Center for Infectious Research, head of the Vaccine Development Office. And at Verico, he was the managing director, okay? This guy is anything but an anti-vaxxer. He is as pro-vaccine as you can get, yet there is something that has got him terrified. Now, that letter really only speaks to the professionals in his field. But luckily for us, he did an interview, I believe it was last week, and normally, you know, we would love to bring Geert on, but I think this interview is so perfect that I'm going to do something we rarely do here on the Highwire. We're going to go through the interview as it appeared. So I want to make sure that you recognize that all of the credit needs to go to the doctor that created this YouTube video and does this interview. But let us walk through what I believe may prove to be the most important interview in the history of mankind. Let's get started. Here's how the video starts out.
I have the pleasure of having with me Geert Vanden from Belgium. The difference is that Geert is truly an international vaccine developer, and he's here to share some very important and unique perspectives on where we are now in terms of the COVID pandemic. So, pleasure to have you here with me, Geert. How are you?
I'm fine. Thanks for having me, Philip.
Wonderful, wonderful. Listen, I mean, I think the first thing that we have to clarify is that we have to explain you are someone who is in the vaccine development business, so to speak. What has that background been like?
Well, I have a background essentially in, as far as vaccines are concerned, in industry as well as in the non-for-profit sector. So I have been working with Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Gavi, especially concentrating on vaccines for global health. Mm-hmm. And I've also been working with several different companies, vaccine companies, developing, of course, essentially prophylactic vaccines. And my main focus of interest has always been, in fact, the design of vaccines. So the concept, how can we educate the immune system in ways that are, to some extent, more efficient than we do right now with our conventional vaccines.
Right. And so in effect, this is the area of work you've been in. You develop vaccines. You are as well working with the Ebola vaccine as well, one of the really, really dangerous viruses we have out there in the world. How does that work? Is that easy to do?
Well, I was not, let me be very clear, I was a coordinator of the Ebola program at Gavi. So we were interacting with several different vaccine companies that were developing Ebola vaccines. because it was important for Gavi to make the right choice, the right vaccine, in order, for this vaccine to be rolled out in the Western African countries that had this severe Ebola crisis back a number of years ago. So that was not, let's say, operational, practical work. This was more a role of coordination, but of course was also a role of assessing what would be the impact of using some of these vaccines in larger populations and in an area where an epidemic is really going on, because that's a very particular and peculiar situation.
All right, so obviously he starts out by, getting into the credentials of Geert, Vanden, Bossche here, and I think there's a couple of things that I found striking right away. What he says is really his specialty is on the design of vaccines. He understands the design of all the vaccines being made in the world. He's worked for Gavi, and in that case, he oversaw the Ebola vaccine program, and his area of specialty is understanding the effect of using vaccines and choosing the specific vaccines and its impact in mass vaccination programs, okay? Have we established that if some guy is going to have an issue with a mass vaccination campaign, this is the guy we all thought was supposed to be in charge, right? But for some reason, he's not. Let's hear what he goes on to say.
If we have 2020 vision at the moment, when we look back at the pandemic and where we started from. And I've always said that at the time when the pandemic started, when it got from China into Italy, into Europe, into the UK, I thought that the only way that we could manage this is to lock down and to prevent the spread of this very dangerous virus. We do have to stand back and see whether or not those decisions were correct. But as we said, hindsight is 2020. What would you say now as we look back at the decisions we made then? Were we about on the right track? Did we make any mistakes?
Well, frankly speaking, from the very beginning, and I mean, there is many people who can witness this or testify this, I always said that it was a bad idea to do lockdowns that would also affect the younger people, that we would prevent younger people from having contact, from being exposed. Because remember, the big difference back then was, of course, that we had a viral strain, COVID strain, that was circulating, dominant strain, and that was not highly infectious as those that we are seeing right now. Of course, when a new virus gets into a population, it immediately gets to the folks that have, weak immunity. And we know these people. This is to a large majority, of course, elderly people that have underlying diseases or are otherwise immune suppressed, etc. And of course, I mean, it was certainly the right thing to do to protect these people and for them also to isolate. But we have to distinguish, frankly speaking, and that is what we have not been doing, between those people that have strong innate immunity. I mean, it's not, you cannot see, when you see a person, you don't know this, but we know that young people have quite decent innate immune response. And therefore, they are naturally protected. And even more, I mean, if they get in contact with coronavirus, it will boost their natural immunity. So therefore, from the very beginning, I disapproved, the fact that schools got closed and universities, and that youngsters were preventing even from having contact with each other. That situation is, of course, completely different if you look at vulnerable people. The virus comes in the population. There is no humoral immunity. There is no immunity at all, in fact. So nobody has been in contact. So the youngsters, they can rely on good innate immunity. Elderly people, I mean, the innate immunity is waning. It gets increasingly replaced by antigen-specific, by specific immunity as people get older. So these people very, very clearly needed to be protected. But it has taken a lot of time before we understood, in fact, how exactly the immune response and the virus were interacting. So there has been a lot of confusion, a lot of mistakes made. Well, mistakes, I mean, retrospectively. And that has also led to, bad control right from the beginning, I would say.
All right, so I think there's some important points to be made here. And by the way, if you're watching the Highwire for the first time, as it turns out, we actually geek out on the science. If you're a person that's saying, I wonder what's going on here, but what you want is a bumper sticker slogan about to make you feel better, then go watch some other network. What we're going to get into and where he's about to go is so deep and profound and powerful that you're going to have to actually care about science. What we're going to get into is the science here with Geert, but let's be specific at what he's pointing out. When there's any time there's a pandemic, when there's a virus that starts spreading, the first people that really we see it affect are those that don't have waning immune systems, the elderly, those that are sick. It's exactly what we saw over the age of 65 with other comorbidities. And we talked about the Great Barrington Declaration. There's now over 50,000 scientists and experts and doctors that have all said exactly what Geert is saying here. He is saying that there's the actual, I think those are the new numbers. There we go. So we're over 50,000, over 750,000 concerned citizens. If you haven't signed the Great Barrington Declaration, you better check it out online and get your signature in there because these things matter. But what he's telling us is that we should have protected that, extremely vulnerable population, something the Highwire has supported from day one. It's what we've been saying. But what also the Highwire has been saying is those that are young, that are healthy, they need to get out and they need to go catch this illness. And as he pointed out, they're only going to just enhance their immune system. It's going to be made even stronger. He gets into a detail I hadn't really thought about and didn't really fully understand that once you get older, once you become, when you're in the later years of your life, you no longer have humoral immunity, or otherwise known as your innate immune system, which is sort of this initial sort of general immune system that just attacks and kicks butt. You're stuck with antigen immunity, meaning the things that you've caught through your life, the memory, it's going to be looking for those things, but it doesn't have the ability to take on a brand new virus or some variant we haven't seen. But our children, they've got that in spades, and college students and healthy people, it's just rocking. We've just got, Mike Tyson's in there ready to go and take out any brand new virus. So we should have been out in the population dealing with it, while the elderly that don't have that innate immune system that we do, they should have been secured. Exactly what the Great Barrington Declaration has been discussing, and obviously scientists and virologists agree around the world. All right, now let's start getting into more details. Here we go.
There's still a rise in cases. Countries had to try and lock down, mask mandates, and so on. But we all had the hope that vaccines would come and break the cycle. This is where clearly now, from your expertise, you seem to have a different thought about how we should have been thinking about vaccines then and even now. What is your perspective?
Well, my perspective was and still is that if you go to war, you better make sure that you have the right weapon. And the weapon in itself can be an excellent weapon. And that is what I'm saying really about the current vaccines. I mean, it's just brilliant people who have been making these vaccines in no time and with regulatory approval and everything. So the weapon in itself is excellent. Question is this the right weapon for the kind of war that is going on right now? And there my answer is definitely no, because these are prophylactic vaccines, and prophylactic vaccines should typically not be administered to people who are exposed to high infectious pressure. So don't forget, we are administering these vaccines in the heat of a pandemic. So in other words, while we are preparing our weapon, we are fully attacked by the virus. The virus is everywhere. So that is a very different scenario from using such vaccines in a setting where the vaccinee is barely or not exposed to the virus. And I'm saying this because if you have a high infectious pressure, it's so easy for the virus to jump from one person to the other. So if your immune response, however, is just mounting, as we see right now with the number of people who get their first dose. They get their first dose, the antibodies are not fully mature, titers are maybe not very high, so their immune response is suboptimal. But they are in the midst of this war. While they are mounting an immune response, they are fully attacked by the virus. And every single time, I mean, this is textbook knowledge, every single time you have an immune response that is suboptimal in the presence of an infection, in the presence of a virus that infects that person, you are at risk for immune escape. So that means that the virus can escape to the immune response. And that is why I'm saying that these vaccines, I mean, in their own right, are of course excellent. But to use them in the midst of a pandemic and do mass vaccination, because then you provide within a very short period of time the population with high antibody titers, so the virus comes under enormous pressure. I mean, that wouldn't matter if you can eradicate the virus, if you can prevent infection. But these vaccines don't prevent infection, they protect against disease. Because we are just, unfortunately, we look no further than the end of our nose. In the sense that hospitalization, that's all what counts. You know, getting people away from the hospital. But in the meantime, we are not realizing that we give all the time during this pandemic, by our interventions, the opportunity to escape to the immune system. And that is, of course, a very, very, very dangerous thing, especially if we realize that these guys, they only need 10 hours to replicate. So if we think that by making new vaccines and new vaccine against the new infectious strains, we are going to catch up. It's impossible to catch up. I mean, the virus is not going to wait till we have those vaccines ready. I mean, this thing continues. And as I was saying, the thing is, I mean, if you do this in the midst of a pandemic, that is an enormous problem. These vaccines are excellent, but they are not made for administration to millions of people in the heat of a pandemic.
I hope that all of you will go back when we, get done with this and go back and watch just that section. There's so much to get out of that. But let's make it clear. One of the kings of vaccines, one of the greatest vaccine developers and overseer of most of our programs around the world, the important ones, is telling you, as someone that describes, I study how the vaccine works, and he tells you this vaccine is not designed to stop infection. Personally, I think the discussion may be over there. So when Fauci says we're waiting for data to come in, I've been thinking, I think the data would have been here by now. This guy is telling you, Geert says, I know for a fact, I've been in all these laboratories. He knows what this is. He's been around over the last 20 years of studying mRNA vaccines and viral vector vaccines. This guy has been in all those laboratories, in fact, running most of them. So when he tells you this vaccine is not designed to stop the infection and therefore transmission, I would take him for his word. And so what he's saying, and look, he's doing his job. He believes in vaccines. He's telling you, this is an excellent product. I would challenge him on that, but it doesn't matter. He's saying this is an excellent product, but it's the wrong weapon. It's the wrong weapon for the war we're in. A prophylactic vaccine cannot be used once the war is upon you, once you're already under assault. He talks about something we have already talked with you a lot about. We are very concerned about people that get that first shot, and then we see the news reports that after their first shot, they got the natural infection. That is the worst case scenario for some reasons we haven't even talked about. We brought up antibody-dependent enhancement, that somehow that could backfire on you and make the virus more deadly. But what he's saying is you're creating a worst-case scenario where you are mounting what he calls a suboptimal response. It's not the optimal response by the vaccine. Your body's trying to create the antibodies, and it's only gotten started after the first shot or right when you get the second shot, and already you're under attack. And so the virus is going to win. And when I was thinking about him describing it, it reminded me of a self-defense class that I was in at one point, where the teacher was talking about, look, if you have a safe under your bed that has a handgun, you probably shouldn't have, the magazine and the handgun all together, I guess, in case your kids get in there, whatever. He said, so you're going to have a handgun and, a safe. You want to open it, then you put the magazine in your gun, and then you're ready to handle it. So let's be clear. This is a perfect weapon and a perfect scenario. Should your dog start barking and you hear that someone's outside your house and you're worried that somebody might be casing your house, you open up your safe, you grab your gun, you pop in your magazine, you're ready to go to defend your house. But let's be clear, if you wake up in your bedroom and you see across the room there's an assailant standing there, by the time you reach over and try and get into your safe, get your magazine, the gun, that assailant is on you, and now you are in trouble. That gun will be useless to you. And I think about what Geert's saying, that's what he's telling you. This would have been great if the virus was coming sometime and you had time to prepare for it and they still got to get through your front door. It's already attacking you. At that point, the gun is no longer the appropriate weapon. In this case, natural immunity would be. In this case, hand-to-hand combat. They're charging at your bed. You're just sat up in bed. You got to jump up and handle that person with your hands as best you can. That's your best case scenario. Doesn't matter that you have a perfectly designed weapon that could do something. It can't do it under this scenario. It will be just developing. You'll just be loading this gun. You'll just be developing antibodies, and you will be caught by surprise. And that is the worst case scenario. And now we're teaching the virus how to get around this vaccine. It's now learning because it's not a full mounted defense. And now it's understanding how the vaccine is working, and it's going to start creating other problems, which he's going to get deeper into. And then when we think about those people like, well, I mean, it stops the variants or the whole discussion. He says something that I found so shocking. He says, you must understand, this virus mutates within 10 hours. So if somebody's having a suboptimal response, it is going to mutate around that suboptimal response and become stronger and more powerful within 10 hours. And so he's saying, we're trying to catch up with that. We're going to, in this race, what are we going to keep making vaccines for all the variants as they appear? Or as Eugenio very well put out, if you're making a third shot, doesn't that mean you're not trusting the 2 shots is going to work? You're darn right. This guy's telling you they're not going to work. But it's not going to be a third shot or a fourth shot. This tweet came to mind. Look at this tweet. This is this guy. Figure below shows thousands of COVID mutations so far. Each point denotes a mutation. Now stop panicking every time you hear of a new mutation with a country or city brand name. Look at all of those dots, folks. This is the reality. Thousands. This thing mutates like crazy. We have thousands. Are we going to take that many vaccines to handle all the variants? This is the wrong weapon for the wrong war. It couldn't be better said, but he's going to get into some really, really stark details. Take a look at this.
You mentioned this in your paper. It is equivalent to using either a partial dose of antibiotics in an antimicrobial or in a bacterial infection, where you then produce superbugs. Is this the kind of example that you're alluding to?
Well, that is a very good parallel. It's also the parallel I'm using actually in the paper we just posted on LinkedIn, which, should be so open for everybody. I mean, it's pure science. Because as you were pointing out, Philip, the thing is, the rule is very simple. I mean, same with antibiotics. Either the antibiotics do not match very well with the bug. That's not good. That's why we are making antibiograms. To first identify which is this germ, and then we choose the antibiotics. We need to have a very good match, otherwise there could be resistance. So when I compare this to the current situation, do we have a good match with our antibodies? No, at this point in time, we don't have a good match anymore, because we have this kind of like almost heterologous variants, so that differs from the original strain. So the match isn't very good anymore, and hence we see people are still protected, but they are already shedding the virus. So that is one thing. The other thing is the quantity, of course. You tell people, you take your antibiotics according to the prescription. Please don't, as soon as you feel well, that doesn't mean that you can stop the antibiotics. Same here. And I give just one example. If you now give people just like one dose, I mean, they are in the process of mounting their antibodies. The antibodies still need to fully mature, etc. So this is a suboptimal situation. We are putting them in a suboptimal situation with regard to their immune protection. And on the other hand, they are in the midst of the war. They are fully attacked by all, by all these kinds of highly infectious variants. So, I mean, it's very clear that this is driving immune escape and will ultimately drive resistance to the vaccines. So my point is, yes, Flip, it's very similar. There is one difference. The virus needs living cells. I mean, if you're driving immune escape, but the guy has no chance to jump on somebody else, who cares? The situation is now different because we are in the midst of a war. There is a high infectious pressure. So the likelihood that an immune escape immediately finds another living cell, that means another host, is very, very high. It's per definition. It's the definition almost of a pandemic.
I mean, he says what I've been saying. You know, we may look back and say Louis Pasteur and antibiotics. I used to say, you know, vaccines aren't the greatest invention of the 20th century, antibiotics are. But now we're looking at the end of the antibiotic age, and if it turns out we only made it like 100 years, we were able to stop infection, but by giving antibiotics, we were teaching bacteria how to get smarter and more powerful, and now they're getting around the antibiotics. We've all seen this, right? The overuse of it in cattle, the overprescription in people. So many scientists and doctors are panicked about it, and most pharmaceutical companies have stopped making all antibiotics because they're saying that the bacteria are mutating so fast now that any product they go into development on, by the time they get it out in the market, the bacteria is already figuring its way around it. Well, how do you avoid that? You got to kill it dead. You got to win the battle. If you got the right weapon, it's got to kill it dead immediately. But what he's saying, just like not taking all of your prescription, all of that antibiotics, which I never really understood that. Why do I got to keep taking it? I'm feeling better. Now I recognize because you don't want your body to turn into a mutation factory that is going to turn this, what was just a benign bacteria or just mildly infectious, into a deadly killer. Like we now see SIRS, MRSA, and CRS, and these different things that are killing hundreds of thousands of people in our hospitals now all the time. This vaccine could do that because it's having a suboptimal response, just like an unmatched antibiotic. And what he's saying, if the vaccine is matched up directly with this virus and you've gotten both your shots, you've mounted defense, it'll do a good job at beating it. But most of you aren't going to have gotten to the full effect of the vaccine by the time you're already under attack. And so therefore, you're going to have this suboptimal response, and now you are going to be responsible for turning this 0.4% death rate virus, which is a nothing burger essentially, except for those in a really high risk category. Now you're going to start raising the risk for everybody and turning it into a deadly killer. Let's get deeper into it.
It raises a simple question that somebody has put in front of us here, which is, it's perfectly common sense. What do we do?
That question is very easy. I mean, we need to do a better job when we are confronted with situations that seem very dramatic, like, an epidemic. Our generation has not, been living in times where there are epidemics or pandemics. And so we immediately take action and jump on the beast with the tools we have, instead of analyzing what is really going on. And one thing that I thought was extremely interesting was, and it's something that was not really understood, we know that a number of people are asymptomatically infected. So they are infected, but they don't develop severe symptoms. Of course, they can have some mild symptoms, upper respiratory disease, whatever. So the question is, what exactly happens with those folks that they can eliminate the virus? They eliminate the virus. They will transmit it. They will shed it for like a week or so, and then they eliminate this. And you could say, yeah, of course we know that antibodies eliminate. Oh, wait a minute. The antibodies come later. You have first this surge of, shedding of the virus, and it's only afterwards that you see, a moderate and short-lived raise of antibodies. So the antibodies cannot be responsible for elimination of the virus. So what is responsible for elimination of the virus? Luckily enough, we have a number of brilliant scientists, independent brilliant scientists, that have now increasingly been showing, and there is increasing evidence, that what in fact is happening is that NK cells are taking care of the virus. So NK cells, the virus gets into these epithelial cells and starts to replicate, but NK cells get activated and they will kill the cell, in which the virus tries to replicate. So I was saying that the virus needs to rely on a living cell. So you kill that cell, it's gone, it's all over. So why we have the solution in the pathogenesis, because some people eliminate it.
Absolutely.
Right? That's the problem.
All right, so this is really, it's amazing because what he's talking about is something that we've been discussing. One of the things that we keep hearing is the vaccine creates more antibodies than the natural infection does. Therefore, this is the first vaccine ever that's better than natural infection. It's simply not true because of what he's describing to you here. The innate immune system you have has got something that vaccine is not doing. That vaccine is making antibodies, which he says is the after effect. That's the last part. Like, that's the cleanup crew. The real butt kickers, the first line of defense, is already in your natural immune system. It's called NK cells, natural killer cells. Now, what these are essentially, and there's a lot of science now looking at this, are these sort of cells that float around. We now believe it's about 10% of your white blood cells. They're these lymphocytes, and they're always monitoring your blood. They're bumping against all the other cells and making sure, oh yeah, that's a healthy cell, just checking it out. They're just walking around, they're like armed guards, making sure that everything's okay. But as soon as a cell is infected with cancer or with a virus, it knows it. And then it has this amazing ability to, get in there and discover, through the interaction with interferons, but it says, oh, wait a minute, this is an infected cell. So it goes in, grabs a hold of that cell, and immediately puts out some deadly goo that penetrates the cell and kills it dead. This is what has been happening for everybody that's not vaccinated that is out there. All of our children, our babies and our children have amazing natural killer cells. Young people, this is that humoral immunity that the elderly no longer have. This is your innate immune system. It's running and coursing through every vein in your body. So if you're terrified of this virus, just know you have this amazing natural killer, these power warriors that are going to go in and just kill the cells dead. Only after that, then, does your body now get into an antibody production space to just finally clean up the last little bit. But science thinks antibodies were the greatest part of this. They're dead wrong. That is the weakest part of the immune response, especially to this coronavirus. They are not inspiring your NK cells. They're coming in for the after effects, saying, see, we got more of the cleanup crew than you did. I don't want a bunch of maids and plumbers. I want the warriors fighting for me. But this vaccine doesn't do that. And now it starts getting really, really scary. Get ready. I hope you're ready for this. But if you're like me, you must be sitting there right now and saying, oh my God, it's now all starting to make some sense. By the end of this show, I am telling you, you are going to be ready to have a conversation you've never been able to have. You are going to be able to say, I now know what happened in this pandemic, and I know what we're going to do if we keep vaccinating. Get ready. Strap yourself in. This ride is about to get really rough. Here we go.
It raises the point that I've always been saying, is that we haven't spent enough time understanding how the virus impacts the body and understanding how the pandemic then will impact the world. We've spent all of our time just going for solutions. Has that been a mistake?
Of course, this has been the most important mistake, I think. I'm not sure many people, and I was part of them. I was just explaining, we don't understand our weapon because we don't understand that prophylactic vaccines should not be used in the midst of an epidemic. And we don't understand exactly what the virus is doing. So we go to a war and we don't know our enemy, we don't understand the strategy of our enemy, and we don't know how our weapon works. I mean, how is that going to go? So that is a fundamental problem to begin with.
I understand, and I completely accept that. But at the same time, I am still thinking that if the governments don't respond in some way, because they have to be seen to be doing something, They seem to be in a lose-lose situation. If they don't do anything, they're going to be criticized, and if they do something, they're going to be criticized. Is that a fair statement to make?
I don't think so. What was this oath of, what's the name of the guy? Hippocrates?
Mm-hmm.
You know the oath?
The first do no harm.
Okay. Well, I mean, it wouldn't matter if you start vaccinating people and even it doesn't work. Problem is that we induce a long-lived antibody response. And as a matter of fact, we know, I mean, that is not my knowledge, it's all published. Problem is that we fail to put the pieces of the puzzle together. Fact is that these long-lived antibodies, which have high specificity, of course, for the virus, they outcompete our natural antibodies. Because they're natural antibodies, they have a very broad spectrum, but they have low affinity, right? And so by doing this, even if your antibodies don't work anymore because there is resistance or, you know, the strains are too different from the original strain, these antibodies, specific antibodies, will still continue to outcompete your natural antibodies. And that is a huge problem because I was saying just a few minutes ago, these natural antibodies, they provide you with broad protection. This protection is, yes, it is variant non-specific. Doesn't matter what variant you get. It doesn't even matter what type of coronavirus is coming in. They will protect you, unless, of course, you suppress this level of innate immunity, or it is, for example, outcompeted by long-lived specific antibodies. And so it's not like, okay, you know, you missed it. Okay, let's try again. No, you did some harm. I mean, this is different from drugs. Immunizing somebody is installing a new software on your computer. Don't forget, I mean, these antibodies, they will be recalled every single time you're encountering a coronavirus, right? I mean, you cannot just erase this. So this is very serious.
This is not like a drug. This is very serious. He uses the term long-lived antibodies. I'm going to use sort of a football way to describe. Now, I think this video is pretty clear, but I really want to make sure that we all get this because I actually learned something this week that I wasn't fully aware of, and now it is crystal clear. But let me see if I can help make it crystal clear for anybody that's sort of thinking about what he said. Now, here's what he is describing, and this is sort of, if you ever played any sport, soccer, football, hopefully this makes some sense to you. But on our team, in our immune system, we have what are called non-specific antibodies. They have, he called it broad spectrum. It's broad spectrum, low affinity. They don't care who is coming across. In this case, let's look at the other team. Let's say these are all variants of coronavirus. We got the A variant, F, T, R, L, Y, X, okay? Now, it doesn't matter who gets the ball in this case. When we have non-specific, anyone that comes across, so let's say X gets the ball, running back gets the ball, comes running over here, boom, right here, non-specific antibodies, boom, tackle, dead, not going anywhere. But let's say it's a different play. Let's say they decide we're going to run Y. So they run Y with a roundabout coming through here. Boom, it doesn't matter. Non-specific, we see the Y too. It doesn't matter. We're going to go after anything because it's non-specific. It's brilliant. These are brilliant antibodies you have as your natural immune system. What if it's a trick play? What if they toss it to A and over here tries to get through? Doesn't matter. Bam, non-specific's going to go after the A variant too. This is how your immune system works, and it's fantastic. Now let's talk about what happens when we're given a vaccine. All right, here we go. Let's go to the next one. So in this case, we're now going to move into vaccine-induced antibodies. As he said, they're long-lived. They don't go away. This isn't a drug that's going to wear off 2 days from now. We say, you know what? You had an allergic reaction. We're not going to do that drug anymore. It is in you forever. There's no getting this thing out. And what did it just do? It created what he called specific antibodies. Specific antibodies is now what we're going to discuss. So now in this scenario playing football, essentially everyone on the team has been told, you're looking for X. The antibody created, in this case, for the spike protein of SARS-CoV-2 that we first saw at the very beginning before there's any variants, our vaccine is going to make you fight that really well. So how does that work? Well, it's great. The coach basically said, I know for a fact that X, the running back there, is going to get the ball, so everyone on the team key on X. Great. So X gets the ball, boom, comes through. It doesn't matter, man. They're all going to jump in there. Yeehaw! Yay, the vaccine's awesome. It totally stopped the virus. Okay? But now here is the problem he's talking about. This entire team can only respond to X. It only understands that it's an antibody specific to the virus it's looking for. So what happens if Y gets the ball? What if the team, they know, it doesn't matter if the coach said it was going to be X, it doesn't matter. Y gets the ball, Y comes around, boom, goes through here, can go anywhere they want. X does nothing. Boom, win, we're in the end zone. We just won. Virus wins the whole game. Because no one on the team was waiting for X, was planned for X. In fact, they were told, don't go near X. I mean, don't go near Y. Okay? All right. But here's something that I didn't understand. I understood that, and we've talked about that basically on the show, not in this way. But it goes one step further, and this is what I think. Oh, actually, I did that wrong. Hold on one second. Boom. Bam. Here we go. All right. Here's what I did not understand about the immune system last week that I do now. When he says that the vaccine-induced antibodies are long-lived, it means they're going to be there forever. He also basically explains that they are more robust. The virus-specific antibodies, the specific ones, they're more robust and they outcompete your non-specific natural immune antibodies. So in this case, you do have some natural non-specific antibodies in there that could handle any one of the variants. But the problem is these guys are bullies. They're bigger, they're stronger, they're more specific, and they're ready to do their job. So if Y gets the ball and starts coming around, our non-specific antibody is going to want to jump in there. Unfortunately, our vaccine-induced is going to push this out of the way and become a blocker to make sure that that antibody or that virus gets all the way in and wins and gets the touchdown and could possibly leave you dead. This vaccine is bullying away your remaining natural immune system. You do have these, but they're never going to work again. Do you realize how horrifying this is? Now think about the hundreds of millions of people that are lining up around the world, that are lined up outside of stadiums right now because CNN and Tony Fauci just said, I love this vaccine. Well, Geert here, one of the leading scientists in vaccine and immunology in the world, is telling you everybody getting the vaccine is destroying their innate immune system. Those immune antibodies that were non-specific, that could have handled any of those thousands of variants we just saw you. They're designed for it. By being vaccinated, you just assured yourself that there are no antibodies inside of you to fight the variants. So if we have strayed far enough away from the vaccine-induced variant that we were looking at, the original spike protein, everyone that is vaccinated is now in horrible, horrible trouble. They're going to be attacked by variants and their bodies will not mount a defense. We are talking about carnage like we've never seen. He's going to get into more detail. Take a look at this.
When I was looking at some of the research around the challenges that they faced with the initial SARS-CoV, the first epidemic, and they tried to develop the vaccines, one of the things they found, certainly when they tested it on the ferrets, was that when they exposed them to a coronavirus again, they got a very severe response to it. Is this what you're saying, that we are putting ourselves in a position where we can then have much more severe disease, even to viruses that should normally be quite benign?
Well, Philip, you see all my passion and my conviction But I mean, I've been the last to criticize the vaccines in terms of could they in some regard be unsafe because, you know, you would have even this exacerbation of disease due to antibodies that doesn't match very well with the coronavirus they're exposed to, etc. I know there is reports on this, and there is a lot of serious thoughts about this. But I think what we are talking about right now, the epidemic or the pandemic problem of having a population that is at no point during the pandemic, and to a large extent due to our intervention, has not a strong immune response. I mean, this is already serious enough. This is more concerning than one or the other adverse event that could maybe elicited. I'm not downplaying it, but that could maybe be elicited because people have antibodies that do no longer match very well with the strain they were, or with the strain they are exposed to, and therefore, you know, they build a complex. They don't neutralize the virus. They build a complex, and this complex could maybe even enhance viral entry into susceptible cells and hence lead to exacerbation of disease. I mean, this may be possible, but the problem I'm talking about is a global problem. It's not an individual getting an adverse event. It's a global problem of, you know, making this virus increasingly infectious because we leave it all the time a chance, an opportunity to escape the immune system, and to drive this, to whip this up, you know, up to a level where the virus is so infectious that we can even no longer control it. Because, I mean, these highly infectious strains, some people think, oh, the virus is going to calm down and it will insert a number of mutations, you know, just to be gentle and kind with us. That's not going to happen. I mean, this highly infectious strain remain. It is not going to be spontaneous mutations that all of a sudden would become, you know, would make this virus again harmless, because such a virus would have a competitive disadvantage, could not be dominant anymore. So that's not going to happen. So we're talking about a very, very, very serious problem here.
This video, in about 40 minutes, manages to encapsulate what we have been shouting from the top of our lungs about on the Highwire for over a year. He's covering so many of the issues we brought up. In this case, the interviewer asked him about what we've been talking about, antibody-dependent enhancement, immune enhancement, or also called pathogenic priming, where the underperformance of the vaccine actually works as a catalyst to make the virus more deadly when it comes in contact with the person. But what Geert is saying is, I'm aware of that, and I recognize that there are a lot of scientists looking at that, which was news to me. Is that news to you? I mean, we are giving this vaccine. This has been, the antibody-dependent enhancement has probably been the #1 thing that we've been worried about here at the Informed Consent Action Network and on the Highwire. We've been trying to warn everybody. He says, sure, that's a problem. And I know there's lots of scientists looking at it, that's good to know. I don't know when they're going to do something about it. But he's saying, I'm talking about a much bigger problem than that. Yeah, that might get someone killed. That might be an adverse event for somebody, that their body ends up, the vaccine actually works against them. Their antibodies help the virus enter the cells and they die. But that would be one person. I'm not worried about that. He said, I am worried about a global event. What I'm talking about is a global issue. And the global issue is the fact that we are helping this virus gain function. We are turning it into a killer in every single body that is getting it, because, you know, it is underperforming and it's not designed for the job. And this is how I now hear it. We all talked about, is this lab created, and these gain of function studies in laboratories where we take the virus and we put it in a pangolin, and then we put it in a bat, and then we put it in a snake, and then we put it into some human cells to see if we can gain function, meaning can we give it more deadly attributes. Well, now what this vaccine is doing is it's turning hundreds of millions of people around the world into a gigantic gain of function laboratory. And where I have told you before that in nature, viruses tend to mutate to become less deadly because if they kill their host, they don't move on. In the evolution, they want to move on, so they stop killing their host. What he's saying is this isn't a natural pandemic. We have inserted ourselves here. We are now inserting a mechanism that we're teaching it to actually go the opposite direction. It's getting more deadly, and the way we're doing it, the other one will not compete. It's not going to move in the direction that a natural virus does because we're not acting naturally. We are putting immense pressure on it with an underperforming vaccine that is going to turn it into a Hulk. And his concern is that it will become so virulent and so deadly, there is nothing we can do to stop it. Now, listen to this.
I've seen the question many times, and quite frankly, I get asked the questions. We're coming to a point where people are going to have to take these vaccines. That looks as though it's the reality, either in the context of work or in the context of travel. Based on what you're saying, they're in a lose-lose situation. What does this mean?
Well, what does this mean is very clear. It's very clear what this is going to mean. So let's consider the consequences of this, both at the population level and at an individual level. Because I would well understand if for the population it's maybe not the best thing to do, but on an individual level, it's still okay. Yeah, then that's not an easy question. But as a matter of fact, it's exactly the opposite. Well, it's not the opposite, it is detrimental, both on a population level as on an individual level. And I'm telling you why. I think the population level, I explained you, we are increasingly facing highly infectious strains that already right now we cannot control, because basically what we are doing is that we are turning, when we vaccinate somebody, we are turning this person in a potential asymptomatic carrier that is shedding the virus. But at an individual level, I just told you that if you have these antibodies and at some point, and I'm sure people can challenge me on this, but reality will prove it. I think we are very close to vaccine resistance right now. And it's not for nothing that already people start developing, new vaccines against the strains, etc. But what I was saying is that, okay, if you miss the shoot, okay, you could say nothing has happened. No, you are at the same time losing the most precious part of your immune system that you could ever imagine of, and that is your innate immune system. Because the innate antibodies, the natural antibodies, the secretory IgMs, will be outcompeted by these antigen-specific antibodies for binding to the virus. And that will be long-lived. That is a long-lived suppression, and you lose every protection against any viral variant or coronavirus variant, etc. So this means that you are left just with no single immune response. With it's none. Your immunity has become nihil. It's all gone. The antibodies don't work anymore, and your innate immunity has been completely bypassed. And this while highly infectious strains are circulating. So I mean, if that isn't clear enough, I really don't get it. And people, please do read my what I posted, because it's science. It's pure science, pure science. And as everybody knows, I'm a highly passionate vaccine guy, right? And I have no criticism on the vaccines. But please use the right vaccine at the right place, and don't use it in the heat of a pandemic on millions of people. We are going to pay a huge price for this. And I'm becoming emotional because I'm thinking of my children, of the younger generation. I mean, it's just impossible what we are doing. We don't understand the pandemic. We have been turning it in an artificial pandemic. Who can explain where all of a sudden all this highly infectious strain come from? Nobody can explain this. I can explain it, but we have not been seeing this during previous pandemics. During natural pandemics, we have not been seeing it, because at every single time the immunity was low enough so that the virus didn't need to escape. So at the end of the pandemic, when things calmed down and there was herd immunity, it was still the same virus circulating. What we are now doing is that we are really chasing this virus, and it becomes all, increasingly infectious. And I mean, this is just a situation that is completely out of control.
I really don't know what to say. As he said, I don't know what it's going to take to get people to listen. What he's telling us is he believes we are just moments away from reaching and creating a coronavirus that is just purely vaccine resistant. And that may be a problem for one person, but he's talking about the global problem. Because once this virus is vaccine resistant, that is the only thing that people who have gotten the vaccine can protect themselves from. And now it no longer works. And when a man who has made vaccines his whole life, that has run most of our vaccine programs around the world, or many of them, when he tells you this vaccine is doing the worst thing of all, it is destroying your innate immune system. It's destroying your natural immune system that would not have any problem fighting variants, would be very good at it, but in this case, it has turned it, he says, nil. It doesn't exist anymore. Your immune system is all gone. It's all gone. Meanwhile, it is fighting a war with a now deadly pathogen that the vaccine forced to be deadly. Folks, this isn't, and by the way, have you noticed that nowhere in here, as a scientist, think about who he is. Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, all the people he's worked for, Gavi, global outreach programs, vaccinations around the world. You have to know the moment he sits in this interview, the moment he posts that letter on LinkedIn, he recognizes, I am about to destroy my legacy in vaccinations. He's trying to tell you, I still believe in vaccinations, but this is the wrong tool. You must listen to me now. And he's not couching any of this. He's not saying, my theory is this, and if I'm right, so that he can back away someday and say, well, as it turned out, he doesn't tell you if the vaccine ends up stopping the infection and transmission, then some of the things that I'm worried about won't happen. He is telling you it has already happened. I am not hypothesizing in the future. I am telling you all of these variants that they are reporting on coming out of South Africa, coming out of Brazil, coming out of the UK. Guess why they're coming from there? Guess where our vaccine trials were from day one? We have been mutating this virus with this product. We have made a grave and dangerous error. And the question we've got to ask ourselves is, what are we going to do about it? How serious is this guy? Does he recognize he's put it all on the line? And he's almost getting tears in his eyes when he talks about his children and the world in the future. I mean, I saw this and I'm thinking it's like that science fiction movie, that scientist in the beginning of the science fiction movie. This is scary, scary stuff, and it is so important. But he's asked how important it is, and why would he risk everything based on who he is? This is how this video finishes up. Take a look at this.
I see all these top scientists looking at these curves, at these waves, like somebody else is looking at the currency rates at the stock market. All they can say is, oh, it goes up, it's stabilizing, it may go down, it may go up, etc. I mean, that is not science. They don't have any clue. They don't even know whether the curve is going to go up exponentially or whether it's going to go down or whatever. They're completely lost, and that is extremely scary. That has been the point where I said, okay, guy, you have to analyze, you have to, but these people are not listening. That is the problem.
So you are in effect putting your reputation on the line because you feel so passionately about this, because I guarantee you that no government, no health system is going to want to hear what you are saying. You're in effect almost giving fuel to the fire for an anti-vaxxer who doesn't want the vaccine.
No. Well, no, not yet, because I've clearly also addressed some emails from anti-vaxxers. I'm not interested, but I'm clearly telling them that at this point, it's so irrelevant, whether you're a pro-vaxxer or an anti-vaxxer, etc. It is about the science. It's about humanity, right? I mean, let's not lose our time now with criticizing people or anti-vaxxer. Okay, if you're not an anti-vaxxer, you could be a stalker. You could be, we like to stigmatize, because if you stigmatize people, you don't need to bother about them anymore. Oh, this guy's an anti-vaxxer. Okay, I mean, he's out of the scope. Oh, he's a stalker. He's out of the scope. I mean, that is a discussion that is completely irrelevant at this point. It's about humanity. And of course, I'm passionate. Of course, I mean, it's about your children. It's your family. It's my family. It's everyone, right? And it's simply, for me, I put everything at stake because I've done my homework, right? And this is simply a moral obligation,
And at the end. All right, so look, folks, I think that we've been handed a tool. This interview is a tool to try and save the world. I think that all of the science we've been looking at, I want to be clear, we have a scientific team that has people as smart as Geert on it. Many of them don't appear on this show. This is what we've been trying to report to you. But now someone has come forward and they've laid it out so clearly for all of your friends and family. Like, I don't know. I mean, I don't want to listen to Bigtree. He's an anti-vaxxer. All those things that we run into. We have two scientists, a video made by two scientists that are having perhaps the most important conversation of our lifetime. If this man is not heard, our species may be in grave danger. That's right. I'm going to go on record here. Go ahead and play it back to me in 5 to 10 years and say Del was overreacting, just like Geert, who was running, most of the vaccine programs that made sense or that were involved in what we were doing in this world. He is coming forward. He has put it all on the line. He says, I know they're going to call him. They're going to call him an anti-vaxxer, folks. We have got to get this video out to everyone we know before the Wikipedia comes out and says that this guy is an anti-vaxxer, despite the fact that he's been working for Bill Gates and everything else. You got to get this video out. And I'm saying, don't share the Highwire this time. I want you to share his video. Don't put the Highwire, don't put us around it to all of your friends. They can't hear it from an anti-vaxxer. Let them hear it from a world-renowned vaccine developer. There, we created a little bit.ly for you. You can click on, take that link and share it everywhere. Or if you just want to go to YouTube, it's Mass Vaccination in a Pandemic, Benefits versus Risks. Please share this video everywhere you can with every human you know. Think about it. Your pro-vaccine friends cannot argue with this video. They cannot say, oh, this is Bobby Kennedy or this is Sherry Tenpenny. This is one of their best and brightest that is warning the world. If we do not share this video, then we are complicit. Then we will be complicit in what could lead to one of the most catastrophic mistakes ever made with this planet and with our species. Now, we are bringing you information like this. And how about the people that are fighting for their lives? All of that happens here. We're only able to bring you this show. We're the only ones putting out a presentation that is making sure the world sees Geert. So please, if you can, we really need your help. We've got lawsuits going on. We are trying to get more and more of this information to you. Go to ICanDecide.org. Become a reoccurring donor. We're asking for 2021, give up a couple coffees a week and go ahead and throw $21 to us for 2021 every month. It makes a huge difference. It makes all of this possible. And what does it make possible? It gives us the ability to share stories when no one else is, to bring out heroes, to reach out to someone that's shouting from a mountaintop. And when you think about what Geert has said, what he is saying, that there are 3 nations he's really worried about that have mass vaccination programs going on: the USA, England, and Israel. And what he's saying is that it is so extreme that you will see a moment of plateau and they'll all say, oh, look, the vaccines worked. But then something diabolical is going to happen. All of a sudden, the variants that it's causing will come in. No one vaccinated will be protected. And we're going to watch a spike that starts coming. Now, you all know the news is going to be, it's because Abbott opened Texas. It's because the anti-vaxxers aren't getting the vaccine. But the truth will be this vaccine program is causing our demise. And then when we think of, America's still huge. There's still half of us at least. I think we're still at 80% of us haven't gotten the vaccine. There's still hope. But what about Israel? What about that tiny little country that has been vaccinating everybody there is, not letting them travel, not letting them, go into places of entertainment or out to restaurants? They need a passport now. Well, because of that, again, another voice crying from the wilderness. We now have voices inside of Israel that want to start a new party. Perhaps they understand what Geert was talking about. Here's actually an audio. This went viral around the world. Listen to this.
It's been very, very, very intense over here in Israel. I don't know how much you're seeing, but it's terrible. It's a very, 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 very frightening situation. So I joined a brand new, we had a human rights movement, and we made it into a political party that's running in our Knesset in less than a month. And they're censoring us and attacking us, and they won't allow any media, nothing. They took away the head of the party's his medical license, and they removed our platforms from Facebook, and now they won't let the media even write about us. So we want to ask all the international, anywhere we can get to publicize what we are saying.
Well, I hope that CNN and MSNBC and Fox and all of the networks in America hear Alana Daniels' plea. Please, we need the media to help. We're being censored. We're being silenced. They're taking away the license of doctors that are creating a new party, an anti-COVID vaccine party that believes in medical freedom. Well, we're going to do our best to get it out to the millions of people around the world that watch the Highwire. I am joined right now by Alana Daniel. Ilana, what is going on in Israel? I mean, I honestly think of all of the places in the world to have an oppression of a people using a medical experiment on them, Israel should be the last place, and yet you are now running first with the most vaccinated population and the most draconian laws for anyone that decides to not vaccinate. What is happening there?
Hi, Del. Yeah, that's exactly right. Out of our 9 million citizens, they claim that they've vaccinated already more than 5 million of us. And you have to think that 2 million are young children. They began a incredibly undemocratic process of rolling this. Basically, it's a forced vaccination, only not in name. They started in the middle of December. And they've succeeded. They claimed that by the end of March that they'd vaccinate all the population, and they surely have. And we have come to realize that that is under a contract that our government made with Pfizer in order to use the citizens of Israel as its test subjects.
Amazing. And so you've decided to create a party almost very just specifically about this issue. Is that remaining 4 million or so? Are they pushing back? I mean, is this a group, or are they lining up and can't wait to get the vaccine? What are you dealing with there?
Well, I think there is no informed consent, and there is no risk-benefit analysis. What I listened to just the segment before is mind-blowing and terrifying. I feel a bit speechless now what I wanted to say, because knowing what this people is facing. You have a real little island of us here, and it's half the Jewish population in the world. And it's a really aggressive program that's being rolled out. You have this country that receives its news in Hebrew, which is the only place you get news in Hebrew, and of the news is absolutely fear-inducing and only positive announcements about this vaccination. There's almost no ability to even have a clue of what the actual data looks like of the people who are being injured after receiving this vaccination. So this party took the initiative. It's politics that's still a bit of a dirty word, even in my own mouth. It was really a human rights initiative to say we're the only people talking about this massive elephant in the room that says that the citizens of Israel have sat in a cumulative 5 months of lockdown. 5 months in our tiny little Israeli apartments, law-abiding, healthy citizens under house arrest, and really jerked around back and forth with the government with extreme behavior modifications and extraordinary implementations, closing our skies, keeping us locked in, and what you have today is people who are willing to just do about anything just to get their lives back, and so there's not a whole lot of holdout. There's a few lone voices, of course, but.
And I would imagine that, you said this is a sort of a human rights, it started out as a human rights group, and now you realize, we've got to get into politics, probably because you weren't getting any press and thinking, hey, if we run and get into politics, we got an election coming up, at least the news will have to cover that, but instead you're being completely censored. What type of censorship is your group experiencing?
Well, as you started to hear in the clip, it was one really tremendous afternoon where Facebook removed something I'm sure you remember, about 60,000 collective people from the pages of Rapay, this political human rights movement party, and of Dr. Avni, the head. And then in an extraordinary move, the Ministry of Health actually asked a retired judge to make he essentially went above and beyond the call of duty and revoked the medical license of the head of the party. And what happened from that clip was there was a huge bunch of media reaching out to Dr. Avni to interview him. And then by the evening, it was people weren't returning his calls, and they were canceling the interviews with him. And I understood at that moment that from a very high up place, they realized that they wanted to censor us completely. And so that hurried call that went around the world really miraculously, because that was ultimately the intention, was I realized that we were being completely silenced. And I knew that we had to go around and get the pressure from the outside in, very much because we here in Israel understand that we are the model. We are supposed to be the poster child. Whatever they jam into a paper and call success is meant to be implemented for countries across the globe. And so it was really my saying, this is a chance, let's come together, because this is for us and this is for all of us.
You're absolutely right, and you're right. What we're seeing is what can happen to a democracy, what can happen, how quickly your rights can be stripped away. When is the vote going to be? We'll make sure to get just this video out so that it can be shared all over the platforms by people. We have a huge following, I know, in Israel, but also people in America that can share it with their families. So give me the name of your party and when we're going to have the opportunity to vote for people that you might be right. We might be voting for the remaining island of human beings that will survive this in Israel. For all of the attacks that have been on Israel from so many different sides, it's incredible that the greatest enemy may be from within, and it may be this vaccine. So for those people that want to stop that from happening, when can they vote? What's the party called? What's going to happen?
It's called Rapay, which means healing in Hebrew, and elections are March 23rd. We're going up against what we never expected. We never thought, those of us who have seen Israel, it's a refuge. It's meant to be a refuge, specifically for the Jewish people, but for all of us. So the fact that we have turned it into a manufactured police state overnight is for those of us a huge betrayal, really, and something that we're not willing not to stop fighting for, because there is nowhere else to go, and we know that it's because we know that this is a global plan. We know that it's time to buckle down all the more. Well,
the Highwire supports you completely. Like I said, we'll get this out there. Thank you for being brave and bold. I am sure that comes with consequences. I know that clearly you're on a bullseye. They're looking at you. But there's so many brave people, just like the scientist Geert that is out there. I believe that evolution, a change, and a brilliant world lays ahead of us. But boy, we're going to have to fight like we've never fought before. So everybody watching this, definitely let's make sure that the Repay Party, that people are aware of it in Israel. And my understanding is if you live in America, but you are, is it Jewish? I think that you can vote, right? You can still vote even from America. No, is that not the case anymore?
No, I mean, if you're Jewish, you could become a citizen, but
so only
you can't vote
citizens,
without.
but living here, they can still vote in Israel.
Well, it would, I guess, depend on whether they could actually get here. Which,
Okay.
of course, is
All right. So then call all your friends in
complicated.
Israel. Let's make sure we help with this issue. And thank you for being a beacon of truth and bold and brave. Our prayers are with you.
Thank you, Dan.
All right. Take care. Well, I know this has been a fairly long show, but for me, I sit here and I think that, you know, if there was, you know, growing up Native American, we always had that thought, it's a good day to die. If we were never to have another Highwire show, I think that this may have been the most important information we've ever shared. We now have scientists and people from all sides stepping up, those that would even any other day probably been against us, that are now screaming, you know, from the tops of the mountains. We must stop this. We must stop this mass vaccination now. And I want you to think about what Geert is saying is that we are creating a virus that is very close to being completely out of control. It's going to be our own doing. And I've said this in interviews with New York Times and everybody. I said there has never been a natural virus or bacteria that has wiped our species off of this planet. But a mistake by science, rushing the science, which are the most scary words ever put into a sentence, that could wipe our species off the planet. And for all of you out there that have decided to not get this vaccination, you must recognize now that you are carrying a massive burden. Only our immune systems will be able to handle all of the variants that are being created, even these deadly ones. And the question at the end of this entire cycle and this ridiculous moment in human history, the question will be, were there enough anti-vaxxers? Were there enough people that left their innate immune system in place and their non-specific antibodies to kill the variants as they came so that humanity could survive? I think that is actually the question that is upon us now. So when you ask yourself, what can I do? What is my responsibility? Oh, I'm a little embarrassed to share some of this information with my friends. I will let you know that over the last 2 days, I have emailed that video and texted that video to every doctor, every producer, every person I can think of. And I'm going to continue doing it tonight and over the next few days. If there's one person I've forgotten that I didn't send it to, that will be on me. We must together right now get Geert's information out to the entire world. They are going to attack him. They're going to try and discredit him. This is no longer just a theory. This man is standing and telling us the truth. He is saying you are seeing it. Where do you think these variants are coming from? Whether or not there are enough people that deny this vaccine, that hold on to immune systems that can carry our species into the future, now relies on us. I know you're going to do the right thing. I know you're still listening because this matters to you, and the future of our children matters to you. So go out, do the right thing, get this interview to everyone you can and the LinkedIn letter that he put out, and make sure you let all of your friends know that this guy's resume, say, look the guy up before you start flapping your lips. Look him up and recognize that this is a man we better listen to. Do the right thing this week, and we'll catch you next week. It's on, baby. We're all needed now. I'll see you next week. Thanks for watching, and thanks to the Highwire insiders who make this show possible. If you'd like to become a Highwire insider, then go to our website, thehighwire.com, and sign up now. And please, share the show. We're on Instagram, Twitter, BitChute, and now on Roku. Because knowledge is power, censorship is real, and we need all the help we can get.